Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd and this is my review of episode 7 of season 5 of Lower Decks. And the episode is called Fully Dilated, which is a phrase usually used when a woman is ready to give birth, like when Keiko was about to and then Worf said she's fully dilated. In the context of the episode, it has to do with time dilation effect, which when I think about it, it's kind of silly how rare it is they actually deal with this issue in Star Trek, a show about traveling around the galaxy, and yet time always seems to be exactly the same everywhere, which is not how it is in reality. I'm not even talking about science fiction. In actual science, time does not move the same everywhere. It depends on how fast you travel and how close you are to a gravity well. So if a planet is really close to a black hole, time will move slower there. But in Star Trek, apparently maybe they have some kind of temporal shields which prevent it, and so everyone experiences time exactly the same way, except primitive planets, I guess. And whenever they do play around with this idea in Star Trek, it's always over-exaggerated. Suddenly it's a million times faster than everywhere else, and so on. So one of the best episodes in Voyager was when they found a planet on which time was moving much faster than normal. And that episode was mostly interesting not because of the science concept of time dilation, but because they played around with it to show the evolution of a civilization and how things affect it and so on. So that's why it was interesting. Also, the Orville did a very similar episode, also to show the idea of the Prime Directive, why it's important not to interfere on primitive planets, and they kind of made like a speed run to show the effects of whatever they did in the past of that planet, to quickly show the results of it using the time dilation and so on. So this is always a fun idea to play around with. And another big advantage in this episode of Lower Decks is that we have a very interesting cameo of Brent Spiner as Data in animated form, which is something I always suggested should be done. I mean, one of the problems with Brent Spiner, he himself said that because he's aging, he doesn't want to keep playing a robot. It's kind of ridiculous, even though he did that in season 3 of Picard eventually. And I'm glad he did, but I always said, why not make an animated version of TNG, and then we can have everyone back. No matter how they look like in real life, we can animate them at any age we want. And so it's something I always said should be done. And it was great seeing and hearing him as Data, even though he's animated. And technically it's not our Data because it's a Data from another dimension, as yet another Rapture opened up, and it's something they've been doing all season. I wonder where it leads to. I'm kind of hoping for those aliens from the episode Schisms to come back as the villains, who might want to invade our universe from their universe, and so maybe that's why they're puncturing holes between dimensions and whatever. So previously in this season they were showing that Raptures are opening up to other dimensions, and in one time it was a Voyager type ship from a different universe in which everyone is tiny and yet identical other than that, and this time it was an Enterprise D that crossed over from a universe in which everything is purple, and so Data from that universe was also purple. And I guess the timeline must have been different there as well, since they all seem to come from the same time as our universe, and so that means in that purple universe the Enterprise D was never destroyed, and Data never died and never aged apparently, and that's how we get him back. So it's not our Data, but he's technically exactly the same, only he's purple, and his dialogue and delivery and everything was pretty perfect. He really did feel like the same Data we all love from TNG, and so this was great, a huge bonus for the episode. And even beside that, the episode itself was great. Many of the jokes were actually funny. I actually laughed out loud. One thing I don't really like is how they directly reference other episodes of Trek by name. They specifically mentioned the episode Carbon Creek from Enterprise, when it shouldn't really be common knowledge. Remember when T'Pol told that story to Archer? In the end she said it's just a story, and they didn't believe her, and so we don't even know if it ever went into the history books. I guess it did, since Mariner apparently knows about it. She also somehow knows about Picard living an entire life in that simulation of a planet in the past where he learned to play the flute, and so Mariner seems to know all the little details of that and tries to emulate that, but how exactly does she know it? When in TNG it seemed as if it was a big secret, as if Picard is not telling anyone about it. When he met that woman he fell in love with in one episode, he told it to her privately as if it's some giant secret that he never told anyone else, and she didn't hear about it from before. So maybe later on in his life he wrote a book about it, and that's why Mariner knows about it. I guess it's possible. I can't come up with explanations, but it kind of seems strange how she knows everything from the previous shows as if she watched them. I also don't like some of the way they speak on the show. Like they always kind of shorten words, like they talk about that fissure to another dimension, and then they call it the fish, let's seal that fish. And so they always do that kind of dialogue, and also the cursing, especially by the doctor, and they do kind of censor it in the show, but it still means the cursing takes place. Another subplot across the episode is that Tandy and Talene are both up for promotion, that one of them will become the chief science officer of the ship. And so across the episode, Tandy is trying to prove that she is better at science than Talene, and Talene is not even aware of the competition. She is just being herself, and she's constantly better than Tandy, and so Tandy is getting annoyed and keeps trying to be better than her. And in the end of the episode, both of them are promoted. Both of them become the chief science officer of the ship, and so that annoyed me a little bit because it's kind of like the new attitude of New Trek, that everyone gets a golden medal, that, hierarchy doesn't mean anything anymore. They did that in Discovery and in Strange New Worlds when Pike said, skip your ranks, they don't matter, and he listens to everyone and everyone are voting on the decisions as if there is no hierarchy. And so I'm not sure I like this idea of New Trek, that feelings are more important than actual functionality, that even though they are kind of like a military organization, so there should be ranks, there should be a chain of command, and yet to keep everyone happy, now they will share the same position. Like, exactly how will that work? And so that annoyed me a little bit, how childish and unprofessional that seems. Realistically, Talene should definitely be the chief science officer. She was obviously better at it than Tandy across this whole episode, which proved it, and it's not about ego or feelings, she's just technically better at it. And so Tandy should have just swollen her pride in the end, learn a lesson that it takes time, it takes effort and practice and learning, and maybe in the future she will be promoted to that position, and she should have just stayed in the lower decks and learned not to get so pissed off. But instead, in the end of the episode, she gets promoted together with her, and they will share that position or whatever, and so that annoyed me a little bit. So those were my complaints about the episode. Everything else was pretty great. I enjoyed it a lot. It was nice to see the Enterprise D again. It was funny when they mentioned it crossed into this universe while battling evil clones of Tasha Yar, which I guess might be a reference to Scylla, even though no, Scylla wasn't a clone. She was the daughter of Tasha Yar from a different timeline, but it's kind of a similar idea that the same actress comes back as evil versions of herself. And apparently a shuttle from the Purple Enterprise crashed on that primitive planet before the Enterprise crossed over back to its own universe. I guess they cannot come back and pick up Data, whom they lost, which seems kind of strange that they would abandon him like that, but I guess we don't know exactly what happened. So anyway, because of the fears that the remains of that shuttle might break the Prime Directive, they have to go down to that planet to recover all the remains. And it's kind of strange because technically if it's a Starfleet from a different universe, is it still the responsibility of our Starfleet to fix it? So anyway, they are aware that the time on the planet is moving much faster than on the ship. They say that 1 second on the ship equals 1 week on the surface of the planet, and so they prepare to beam them in and immediately be ready to beam them back up a second later. But Boimler messes things up because he's drinking some strange beverage made from fish oil or whatever, and right after they beam out he accidentally spills it all over the controls, and so he's unable to clean it up quickly enough, and they end up spending months down on that planet. And it was kind of funny the way it always cuts back to the ship to see him desperately trying to clean it, and at some point they try to lick the controls to clean it faster, and then they get electrocuted by it, which doesn't really make sense. Why would it electrify them? I mean, shouldn't it be kind of waterproof? And also, isn't Starfleet technology not really based on electricity but more on optical fibers, and so it shouldn't really electrify him? But anyway, it is kind of funny, so I give it a pass. And whenever it cuts back to the ship and then back to the planet, months have passed on the planet. So anyway, they do find the remains of that shuttle and find the head of Data. And there's also an alien who keeps lurking them, who keeps suspecting them of something. And that was also funny the way they played it around with that idea, which is kind of a trope idea. It's something that was often done in all kinds of science fiction shows like this, that always there's someone who is suspicious of the team and follows them and stuff like that. So that was kind of funny the way they played around with that. And Tandy manages to reactivate Data's head, and she asks him for advice on science to help her become the chief science officer. They keep showing how Talene is much better at science, that she's able to grow huge fruits to sell in the market so that they'll get some currency. And so they keep showing this competition that Talene is not even aware of. She's just trying to be efficient and help them out, while Tandy keeps getting annoyed and trying to outdo her and seeks Data's help in that. And one of the funniest jokes, I think, when Data said it's not the first time he was just ahead, and then he tells about the time that he got stuck in San Francisco of the past. And Tandy asks, how did you get back to the future? And he says, I waited in a cave until Captain Picard, myself, and some guy in a silver jumpsuit dug me out. And that line was so funny to me for some reason, I'm not even sure why. I had to go back and look at that scene, and it was indeed a guy in a silver jumpsuit, and his name was never mentioned anywhere in the episode. That's why it's so funny. But in context, in universe, wouldn't Data know who that guy was? Like they got invited back to Earth to be shown Data's head that was found in a cave, and so wouldn't Data know who this doctor, archaeologist or whatever who found it, what his name was? So how come he doesn't know it? So because the episode itself never gave him a name, so Data here also doesn't know his name and calls him some guy in a silver jumpsuit. So to me, I don't know why it's so funny to me. Even now that I'm thinking about it, I actually think it's one of the funniest moments in the whole show for me. I literally laughed for a few minutes from that line, and especially after I looked up that scene in that episode and saw that, yes, that's the only way to describe that guy. We don't exactly know who the hell it is, just that he wears a silver jumpsuit. So, and I guess there is a small continuity issue with this line because it was not Picard and himself that found him. They got invited back to Earth after his head was already found by the guy in the silver jumpsuit. But I guess from the perspective of the head, since that's the first time they uncovered his face, maybe that's why to him it seems as if he was found by Picard himself and some guy in a silver jumpsuit. I don't know why it's so funny to me. Anyway, so this was one of the best member berries, one of the best and funniest moments. I don't know why. So anyway, that lurker alien finds out about Data's talking head, and so he calls it a hornless demon head, and he thinks they're witches and ties them up. Then later they ask Data to chew their ropes, and he says he doesn't know how to do that, but he did once see Worf do something like this, and so that's why he does it. And then they tell him, oh, you really are fully functional. And that is also really funny because it must mean that somewhere between scenes that we didn't see, somewhere he must have told her that. He must have said to her, you know, I am fully functional in multiple techniques. Otherwise, why would she say that now? It's not as if she watched TNG and knows that he said that to Tasha one time. So how exactly does she know that unless he said it to her at some point that we didn't see? And so that's why it's also really funny to me. And meanwhile, Mariner keeps getting into trouble and she keeps getting locked up in prison, and she makes a flute out of some soap because she tries to be like Picard in the episode Inner Light, which she's somehow aware of. Anyway, I mentioned that before, how it doesn't really make much sense, but I guess maybe Picard wrote a book about it after TNG. It would have been much better for the show if they simply said that she grew up as a kid on the Enterprise D. That would explain her personality maybe. She's so messed up because she kept growing up with all the crazy stuff happening around her, and that's why she's so strange, and that's how she knows all the little private things that happen to everyone on the Enterprise D. So anyway, the alien lurker tries to get a mob to attack our team, and then they fool them by making him look like an idiot, that he mistook some huge grape which they painted Data's face on to make him look as if he just misunderstood, and so everyone thinks he's an idiot, and so the situation is saved, I guess. And Mariner asks to hold Data's head, and she's such a big admirer of Data. The dialogue seems to indicate she never actually met the real Data, and so I guess it cancels my theory that she grew up on the Enterprise D, because if she did, that at some point she would have met him. So anyway, she says his head is warmer than she expected. And he says, why did you have a preconceived notion about my temperature? And she says, you're really cool. And he says, I'm cool? Then why does my warmth surprise you? So anyway, all the dialogue of Data in this episode was pretty much perfect. He sounds exactly like Data from TNG, which is great. It's also a great idea to think that in that other dimension of the Purple Enterprise, that Enterprise was never destroyed, and Data never died, and the situation basically, it was like a longer version of TNG, which never ended, and there are evil clones of Tasha Yar running around, and all of that is really fun. Maybe they should do an animated show of that. I'd watch that. So eventually they get back to the ship and then are angry at Boimler, who tries to pretend as if it was just a glitch of the controls and not his fault, even as he's covered with all that goo, and so that's also funny. And then they send Data's head back on a torpedo through that fissure back to his own universe, and that scene looked very similar to how they launched Spock to the Genesis planet inside the torpedo. I mean, the way it visually looks very similar, I guess, is not a coincidence. And that's the end of the episode. So I really enjoyed it. It was actually funny, it was actually interesting, and they brought back Data, who actually feels like Data from TNG, and so everything about it was great, except a few little notes I complained about, but it was definitely one of the best episodes of the show. So I give it a 9.9 out of 10. That's my opinion. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.